Let's talk about data sharing, which is also a very unique feature in Snowflake, because traditionally data sharing could be quite a complicated process. Because once we have shared the data, for example, with some customer, we again, once the data has been changed and updated, we need to again extract and load the data to the customer. So traditionally, this was very complicated. But thanks to the unique architecture in Snowflake, we know storage is decoupled from compute. This is actually very simple. So we can share the data without actually making a copy of the data. We just grant access to the storage layer to this specific data, and then we can let the consumer use their own compute resources. So like this, the data in this share will always be up to date because it's actually the same data. And we don't need to pay for the compute as the provider, but the customer, the so-called consumer, will use their own compute resources. So let's have a closer look at how this works. First of all, this is available for all of the Snowflake editions. So every account can make use of sharing. We have, for example, one account that wants to share some data. This is called the provider account. And then we have another account that wants to consume our data. So they want to have a look at the data, and therefore this is called the consumer account. So we can just create a share, and we'll see just in a second how this works exactly. And then the consumer will have read-only access to this data. So there will be then a database that the consumer can create, and we'll see in just a second how this works exactly. But it is important that this is a read-only database. So the consumer can only read the data but cannot make any modifications like adding objects or adding data, changing data. This is read-only. And as mentioned, this is not actually copying any data. So this is again just a metadata operation, and therefore we again use the cloud service layer to leverage this operation. And then like this, we have still the storage, which is just paid by the provider. There's no need to duplicate the data. And then when the consumer wants to query from this database, they use their own compute resources. So this is important for the billing, because then the consumer is paying for the compute, and we as provider just provide the storage, and we of course also then pay for the storage. And it is also possible to be a provider and a consumer in the same time. So we can both consume data and also provide data. Actually, it's even possible to provide and consume in the same account, so with the same data share. But this is usually not very relevant, but in general, it's important to know that it's possible to be both a provider and a consumer. So let's have a closer look now at how this works exactly. The first step to set this up would be to create a share in our provider account. This means we would have to have the account admin role or the create share privileges. Usually this is the account admin because this is an account operation. So this would be usually the role that executes this command. So this will be just a create share command, which is basically just acting as an empty shell. So just the container in which we can grant the privileges. We put the database and then all of the privileges and of course the accounts that we want to share this to. So the first step, just creating this empty shell. Then the second step would be to grant now the privileges to the database, the schema, and then all of the objects in this database. So for example, a select on some tables. This is done as the second step. And afterwards, we can add also the consumer accounts. We can, of course, create this share with these accounts already, or we can have also a share that in the beginning when we create it has 0 consumers. So we can just add them later on by just altering the share, and we can then, like this, just add the consumer accounts, so one or multiple accounts. And as mentioned, even it's possible to have 0 consumer accounts to a share. This is theoretically not a problem at all. And then the last step would be to now in the consumer account import this share. So now once we have shared this to the account, this is visible, and the account admin or someone with import share privileges and create database privileges can create now a database from this share. So again, usually this is just for simplicity the account admin, but in theory also import share and create database privileges would be enough. So this could be delegated and then also be done by someone else. So like this, we have now a database created from the share. And of course now, if we want, we can grant additional privileges because the privileges will not be shared. So we are responsible now in the consumer account to grant the relevant privileges. And now, finally, let's also quickly demonstrate what is possible to be shared. So we have tables, external tables, secure views, secure materialized views, and secure user-defined functions. So as mentioned, the share itself is just the container, and in this share, we have one database. Then we can grant again usage on the schema, and then also all of the objects that we want to grant privileges to. And then the last component is the accounts. So we can have 0, 1, or multiple accounts. And of course, the privileges to these objects are also part of a share. As a best practice, when we want to share data, it is recommended to use secure views. Because if we would just use views, we could make some information available that we maybe don't want to reveal. And also, for example, when we have data coming from multiple databases, typically we create one view in a separate database, and this will be then the database that we share. So this is a... Now let's have a look at how we can create a share and share this to a consumer account. So how we can do this is by creating, of course, a share object, and then we have to grant permissions on this share object. But we will now do this step by step. So first of all, we want to set things up again. So for this, I will just create a new database. So everything will be in this database. We call it just data S. Then we want to create a stage. So we just want to have a look what is in this stage. So I'm executing those 3 commands. And afterwards, we will see that in this stage, we have those 3 files just, and I will create now a table. So I will just set up this table, and note, of course, I'm automatically, now that I have just created this database, this has been selected as our context. So I can just create here this orders table. And of course, what I want to do then is I want to load the data into this table from our stage. And I see this file has been loaded. And now, of course, we should have some data in here. But now the question is, how do we start? So of course, step number 1 is to create our share object. This is essentially just the shell of our share, and then we can grant permissions on this share to some of our objects. And of course, this share will be shared with another account, and we will set this up step by step. So as we have mentioned, we want to, as step 1, create the share. This is just the shell, and now it is empty. So basically, we need to now set up grants. So when we want to grant select on a table, we also need to grant usage on the database and usage on the schema. So usage on database and schema, both to the share orders share. So as if we would also grant privileges to a role, we can also grant this privilege to a share and then the name of the share. So we grant those 2 privileges, and of course then when we want to have access to the table itself, we also need to grant a select on the table, and then we specify the table name. And of course, we talk in another part of the course in more detail about the privileges and access control. But here we have seen now we have granted access to these objects or on those objects to the share, and we can now also verify this, that this is correct. So we use show grants to share and then the share, so we see what are the grants of the share. And we can see we have usage on the database and schema and the select on the table. So this is actually what we want. And now, of course, we need to add an account to our share. So we do this by just altering the share basically, and we add a given account. So I have already set up another account. By the way, this is actually just a reader account, and we will also set up a reader account later on in this section. So we will see how this can be done. For now, I want to just use the locator of this account. So this can be found, for example, also in here. This is basically just the identifier, and this is the account identifier that we need to add in here to locate this account. And in here, I just want to add this identifier, and in here, I can then now add this account to our share. I will execute it, and then this has been executed successfully. So now, of course, let's have a look into this account and see if we are actually able to now work with this. If I execute the command show shares, we will be able to see nothing because we have the sysadmin selected. So let's make sure to use the account admin. Then we can just execute this again. And then here we should be able to see this share, or all of the shares actually. But we see in this case that we have only access to one object. So this is the object, the database, that is already part of this account. But of course, we have here this share, but we have not access to any objects yet. So we first would have to create a database in this account from this share. So these are just the two shares that we have access to. So these are the inbound shares. They have been shared with us, and in those shares, there could be some objects. But of course, now we want to again use the identifier from the producer account. And this one we find here in the owner account. So we just need to select it. We can just copy that in here because we would like to have a few more details on this share. So this is essentially the name of the share, and I can now also execute this to have a few more information about this share. So we can see that here we have the database, we have the schema, and also the table. And we now need to first, as I have mentioned, create a database out of this share. So I will again just add the full name of this share in here. So how we create a database in our consumer account, so in here is just create database, then the name of the database, and then from the share. So here we just specify the share itself. So a share is basically containing our database. And I will now just create this database like this. And now if we refresh, we should be able to see this database. And you can even see by this little icon that this is a shared database. So here you see in source that this is actually a share. And now, of course, let's verify that this actually works. So here we can already see the tables are included, this orders table, and we are now also able to query from this table. So in this case, of course, I haven't selected a warehouse. So therefore, I will also go ahead and set up a virtual warehouse and grant usage on this to a given role. And let me just select the account admin for this. And then we are hopefully able to now query from this table. So I will just run here now the select. And then we can see that here is the actual data of this table that we have gotten from the data share of the provider account. All right, so now we also want to have a look at how we can create a share through the interface as well commands. And now we want to do the same thing also using the interface and see how we can create a share and how we can also manage our existing shares using the interface. To do this, we can just navigate in our navigation to data products. And in here we have this option private sharing. So if we want to see what we have shared to others, we can go to shared by your account. And in here we can see the share that we have created before. So I have now a few options. Of course, I can create a new share by clicking here on this button and then create a direct share. So how this would work is, of course, we select the data. So for example, here data S, then the schema and potentially some of the tables that are included. So we can select them, and like this we can make it very easy to set up this share, and of course also then accounts. So of course they should be set up here, and we have done this also previously using secure commands to add accounts to our share. In this case, we could create a share very easily like this, but we can also modify an existing share in this case using the interface as well. So if I want to have a look at this share and maybe also want to modify it, I can just select it, and in here I could do a couple of things. Of course, we can see this is shared with this account. And we could also, let me go back, add additional consumers. So we can add multiple consumers to our share. We could do this just by clicking here on add consumers, and here we could add additional accounts. And additionally, we can also, of course, do things like a description and so on. But of course, more importantly, here we have the data. So what we can do is we can either add additional tables or views. So if I want to do this, I can just click here on this database with the table. So this is option number one, adding or removing additional tables or views or functions, but we can do this only from one database. This means that a share is always containing one database basically. And if we would want to use other tables from another database, we can use views. But we talk about this, we should actually use so-called secure views. We do this in another lecture. But if we want to just use a different database all at once, we can just change it. So we cannot add multiple databases. So we would have to change the database in here, and then we could also select it. Of course, as I've said, we can include data from multiple databases using ideally a so-called secure share, using ideally a so-called secure view, and we do this at another part of this section. So this is how we can also work with the interface, setting up a share, modifying an existing share, and managing this in here. Hope it was helpful. With a customer, for example, that doesn't have an own Snowflake account, this is also possible. We just need to use in our provider account the role account admin, and then we can create a so-called reader account. This will be just some access for the customer, but this account just basically belongs to our provider account. So this is not really an account like a customer of Snowflake, but it's just part of our provider account. It will be just a URL, so something that the users or the customer can log into, but this is for the sole purpose of consuming our share. So this will be completely created and managed by our provider account. And then we can just make this share available to the customer. And of course, now we remember, we of course are responsible for the storage. This is normal. But now with this reader account, since this customer is not really a customer of Snowflake, they are not paying for the compute. But we are now responsible to provide compute resources. And of course, this is also relevant for the billing, because now, since this reader account is part of our account, we are responsible also for these compute costs. So we are responsible here for all of the costs, and the reader account, so this customer, will have no cost. So we have to be a bit careful with these costs because we are responsible for this. And now some final consideration for data sharing. So some additional things that are also important to know for the also later on add some objects, so we can grant additional privileges. And then this will become immediately visible to the consumer. So they don't need to make any changes. When we change the data or anything in this share, it will be immediately visible to the consumer. So once a share is shared to the consumer, it will be immediately visible. And we have also learned that every account can share and consume. So this is a standard feature for every account. And it's even possible to be consumer and provider in the same time, even actually for the same share object. And also, this is a feature that is not available with the virtual private edition. This is not possible because the virtual private edition, they have some dedicated compute and metadata storage, so we cannot make use of this feature with this virtual private edition. And we have also the marketplace. This is the Snowflake marketplace where we can also find and import third-party data sets. So some other companies provide services and data sets, for example, about the weather or some other analytical data sets that we can then import. Of course, again, every user can search for them, but only the account admin or people with the import shared privileges can then again import these shares from the marketplace. And there are some that are free, and there are also some that we have to pay for. And then finally, we also have so-called data exchange. This is just a private hub for sharing data. So in here, we can just invite members, maybe a small group of members where we can share data with. So this can be also made possible, but we need to first enable this. This is not available per default, but we need to reach out to Snowflake support for this. And now let's put things to practice and implement this in our Snowflake. Let's now have a look at how we can set up a reader account so that we can also create a share or use the share that we already have and then add this additional account to our existing share so that we can also share data with this reader account, which could be somebody that is maybe a non-Snowflake user. So we want to share it also to them using this reader account. So step number one, we create an account, a reader account, and we do this by using the command create managed account. And then here we can just give it an account name so we can identify it. And of course, an account always in the beginning needs an admin. So this is an initial user that has access also to the account admin role. And here we just give a name and of course a password to log in. So this is essentially the login to this account. And the type of this managed account is a reader account. So let's go ahead and create this account. And then when we do this, we will see that we already get the information to this account. So we get the account locator, the URL, and so on. And if we later on want to see this information again, we can just use the command show managed accounts. And then we can also see that from within here. So if I would just select, in this case, the account locator URL, I would just copy it from here and then I would just open a new window. So in this case, I would use an incognito window because then I'm in a different account. So maybe this takes a couple of seconds until this is set up. So let me just wait for a couple of seconds and then try this again. So now I see it is working and I can enter now my username and my password. So essentially I can just go ahead and copy this from here. In this case, this will be the username, so I can just paste it. And then, of course, also we need the password. So let me also copy this and then also insert it into the login. So we can just do it and then sign in to this account. And in here, of course, we now have this empty account more or less. So in this case, if I, for example, open a new worksheet, of course, I have my initial user that has also access to the important roles, so the account admin role and all of the other roles. So you can see this is something we also have access to. But of course, we don't have any access to our data share yet. This is what we still have to set up. So therefore, let's navigate back to our main account. And in here, of course, later on, we can also drop this account easily using just the drop managed account. And by the way, also what we can do is we can under data products. So if we go in here and then to private sharing, I can just open this in a new link. I can also see our reader accounts. So in here, I can see reader accounts, and there this account is also available. I have here the locator URL to log in, and also I could drop it from here and also set up a new account. So now what we need to do, of course, is we need to share the actual data. We already have set up this orders share, so this share object, and also this share has already access to the data, so the database usage, schema usage, and select on the table. And now we just need to add the account. So here we need to add this to this share, and then we will also have access to this. So in this case, we have again the account locator. So if I navigate to this, I can see the locator in here. So I can just select it, and in here I can just copy this locator from this account, and I can also paste it in here so that we will add this account to our existing share. So let me execute this, and I will see this has been executed successfully. And now if I go back to the account, so the reader account, we don't see anything. But if I use the command again, show shares, I should be able to see the inbound share that we have access to. Of course, let me use the account admin. So if I use the account admin, we should be able to see this inbound share that we now have been shared by this main account. So here the orders share. And of course, now we also want to go ahead and create a database in this reader account. Now have a look at how we can now also create a database from this share in this reader account so that you can follow along with me. Step number one, of course, we need to use the command show shares. So this is the one that I have already executed. So shares, and we can say show. So in this case, we will see all of the existing shares. And then afterwards, we can use the identifier. So in this case, the account, the owner account, we can just copy also from here. And we have to paste this to get this full name. So I will just copy it and paste it in here. And then we can get a few more information on this share. Like, for example, what are the objects that this share has granted on. So therefore we can see here database schema and table. And of course, now we have to create a database from this share. And we can do this just as we have seen already by creating a database and then just using from share and then the name of this share. So if we execute this as well, we can see that after a couple of seconds, and just be aware, this might take indeed a couple of seconds. So in this case, we already see the database in here. And of course, also the table. So we could, of course, now try to query from this. But again, we will see we don't have a warehouse selected in the current session. And there's also not automatically been started a warehouse, which is probably the case because there are no warehouses yet. But since we are account admin, we can actually create a warehouse here. So in this case, I will create a warehouse of the size extra small. And here, of course, we should set auto suspend to in my case, I will use just 3 minutes, a relatively low value, and auto resume also to true. And of course, initially suspended, we can set to true. This is a good idea per default in general. And now we have this set up. So now we should be able to actually just directly query, and this warehouse should be started then automatically. And indeed, we can see that the data is available. But now, of course, we might have the situation that there is not only one user, not only the account admin, but maybe we want to share it to additional users. So therefore, in the next lecture, we also want to have a look at how we share data with an external organization. Probably there is more than just one user, and therefore we want to see also how we can set up additional users and grant them with the necessary permissions so that they can actually consume the data. So let's see how we can do this. we are now in our reader account. So from this reader account, we have, of course, our initial user, and this user has also the role account admin. So this user can now set up additional users because it is the account admin. And now we could, for example, create a user using the create user command. Here, the name and then also the password. So essentially, this is the login name, the username, and then here we have the password, this very difficult password. And I will now start by doing this. And I think we should probably use here a different. And then this is created. And we now, of course, still have to grant the permissions. So, of course, what we need to do is when we have a warehouse, we need to, this is just what we have set up before, but this is only now the access. But here only the account admin currently has access to this. So therefore we still need to explicitly grant usage on this warehouse to a given role. So we could just make this to the entire role public. Then every user would have access to this warehouse. So here we will grant just the usage on the warehouse to this public role. And of course, Miriam, this user, since we didn't add any other role, this per default always has the role public assigned to it. So therefore, Miriam will also have access to this role public, and with this role public, then usage on the warehouse. Of course, now how we can also give her admit and how we can also now grant her privileges on this shared database is to just grant imported privileges on the database, share database. So this is how we can also now grant access to additional users. We just grant imported privileges on the database of here this shared database that is just created here. And like this, we can also share this database that was created from a share. So here we grant always imported privileges on the database, and then she will have access to everything that has been granted in this, that has been inherited from this share. So I will execute this command, and now we can of course go ahead and test it with this user and see if this actually works and everything is set up so that she can have access to this data share. So to access now this user, I will just again go here to our account, and in here we have the current account selected, and I can just copy this account URL, and then again I will open this in a new browser. So for this I will just open a new incognito browser, paste it in here, and then of course we have to now use the login details that we have just set up before. So this will be the username here, Miriam. We enter, and then of course this very difficult password we will also copy and paste into the password in here, and then we now should have access to everything. So we want to test this. Of course, in this case we can just start by creating a new worksheet. So here let's set this up, and then we now should have access to this database, which indeed we already do have access to this, which is great. And additionally we also should have access to this warehouse, which it looks like we also have. So this is also great. And now we could just, for example, set up a simple query, so a simple select, and here we want to just use this orders table, so we can just insert this into the editor and then run this command. So I just use Control Enter, and in here we see no active warehouse selected. So let me select it, and then we should be able to do this. So this is what we have to do, and then we can see that now it works. So now we have successfully set up a share. We have done this through our reader account, and in here we have also created a database from the share, and then we have also been able to set up a warehouse in here, and then also grant permissions to a new user that we have set up. So here we have set up this user. We have to just grant the usage on this warehouse that we have also created in this account. And then we can grant also the privileges on this shared database to other users by using grant imported privilege on this database, in this case to the tables, but we always had to explicitly grant permissions for every individual table. And therefore in this lecture we also want to see that we can also grant selects on all of the tables in a given schema or database. So this is what we want to walk through in this use case. And of course, then what happens if we create a completely new table in this database that we share, and also what happens if we are updating data in a table that is already shared. So this is some important behavior that we want to now have a closer look at. First of all, we can run the show shares command to see what are the existing shares. So of course it depends on what role we have selected. If we are getting results that are different than we expect, we might want to check the role. So I run it again, and now I should have enough permissions to see the existing shares. And also I now want to have a look at a new use case, so therefore I want to create a new share. So here I want to show how we can share a complete schema. So all of the tables in a given schema. So for this, I will create now this new share object. Of course, we know now this share is still empty. So we need to grant usage on a given database. And note, we can always only, we have learned about this already before, have one database being part of one existing share. So we can either switch the database, but we cannot add multiple databases to one share. Of course, we can grant usage on multiple schemas though. In our case, we just want to grant the usage on one schema, so on the public schema. But now, as we have said, we want to grant select on all of the tables in the schema. To do this, we just grant select, and then we can just use not on a specific table, but on all tables in this schema. This is the command that we can use. So instead of one table, we just use all tables in schema and then the name of the schema, and then of course to this existing share. Something similar we can also do on all tables in the entire database. This would work the same. We just want to execute this first command, and then we should be able to now see that 17 objects have been affected. So now there should be 17 tables that also the share should have access to. And of course, we also need to add the account. So again, we can go to the account, and in this case, what we can do is we can go to private sharing. I will just open this in a new link. Again, make sure that you have the correct role account admin selected. And then you can, in private sharing, go to reader accounts. And this already tells you that the reader accounts are actually, they are made for private sharing because some are not Snowflake users, and therefore we can set up an account for them to consume data. So this is the idea of those reader accounts. This is why we also find them here under private sharing here. And now here we can see this is the locator. So we can just basically copy this one from here and then paste it into this account. So like this, we can add the account to our existing share. I will just execute it, and then we will have a look into our account, so the reader account. And now we should be able to see this. Again, make sure you have the account admin selected in this case. And then we will see, in this case, this complete schema share. And of course, now what we want to do is we want to see a few more details. And in this case, I want to also note that we have here a little typo. So therefore, we should also correct the name. I will just copy it from here. And also I will correct it. So I paste it in here. And also we have this in here. And then we can also find the locator of the owner account. We can also copy that and paste that in here. So now if I run this describe command, maybe I have to add here shares. So describe the share. And then we should be able to now see some more details on this share. So in this case, we can see what grants we have available on this share. And now, as expected, we can see all of those tables within this schema. So this is now really good because now we have access to everything. And of course, what we need to do if we want to consume this data, we need to create a database in this consumer account from this share. So to do this, we run create database, the name of the database, and then from this share, of course, here we should also replace the locator of the provider account. And then we have this database now visible. We should just quickly refresh, and we can see that now it is fully available in here. So we can see everything is there. And of course, now the question is, we can of course run this. We have tested that already. So this would spin up our warehouse. And yeah, we can actually do this and see if this also works. And of course, here we should select the warehouse. And then let's try to run it again. And here we can then see that this is the data that we expect. And now we want to test what happens if we are updating existing data or if we add a table to this schema. What happens? Let's test this in our provider account. So in here we have two options. First of all, of course, when we update the data, we expect that this is also updated in the consumer account because we are sharing the data. So it's not duplicated, but we just share it. So we should immediately see this reflected in this consumer account. So if I run this command in here, I should also see that now there are no more negative values and they should be all updated to 0. So this is exactly what we have done in here. Where the profit was negative, we just set it to 0. So this has worked as expected. Now the question is, what happens if I create a new table in this account from the provider? So in this case, we expect that this should not be available in the consumer because it is a completely new table. And we always need to explicitly grant permissions for the object. So when we add a new object, even though we have initially granted to all of the tables, this was just for all of the tables that were present at this moment in the database or the schema. So therefore, we should expect that we cannot query from this table, or this table should not be there at all. So in the consumer account, let's verify that this new table is actually available. So we can say, let me maybe check what was the table. So it is in public new table. And in here we can see it is there, new table. But if we now go into the other account, so the consumer account, we should not see this new table. Even if I refresh, I should not be able to see this new table. So this was not shared yet. All right, so this is how we can grant permission to all of the tables in a given schema or a database. And of course, also the behavior of what happens when we update data. This is live sharing, so it will be immediately visible. And of course, new tables that are created, they will not be shared automatically, but we always want to talk about sharing views because sometimes we want to share only a limited amount of data. So we don't want to share maybe all of the columns, but maybe only a few columns. Another use case for sharing a view could be that we want to share maybe data even from multiple databases. This would be also a way of doing this by using a view. However, we should not use a standard view in this case. So Snowflake doesn't recommend to share a standard view because this can reveal data that we don't want to actually share. So it can reveal underlying data that is not even part of our view. And instead, we should use a secure view. So therefore, in this lecture, we just briefly want to talk about the difference of a standard view and a secure view to understand really why they are different and why we should use a secure view. And then afterwards, we will see how we can share also a secure view. So let's walk through our use case and our scenario to understand this. First of all, I will set up a database, customer database, and also the table. So this is the customers table that we are going to use. Then here, of course, we want to load some data. So therefore, I will create here a file format object. We will just load a CSV file. And also, I will set up here this stage. And on this stage, we will see that there is this CSV file customers. Let me execute this command correctly, and then we will see that here is this customer CSV. And now we, of course, also want to prepare our table. So we want to copy the data from this stage into our table, into our customers table. So we just use here the copy command. Okay, we can see data has been loaded. This looks good. And now if we have a look at the table, we should see that the data is now available. Now let's again create a view, because we have said in our case, we might have the situation that we don't want to share all of the columns. Maybe the job column is something that should not be revealed. And also maybe we don't want to share all of the rows. So maybe we want to not reveal the data scientists. So maybe this is something that is not supposed to be shared for whatever reason. There can be many reasons. And therefore, if we set up this view like this, and now we want to simulate how the underlying data, some structural data, can be revealed, because there are a few ways of how this data can be revealed, even though we don't have access to the underlying data. So this is used actually for some internal optimization, and there are a few ways of how the underlying data, the underlying structure also is used, so that this could be revealed, and we don't want to actually reveal it. So let's see how this looks like, because now this was maybe a little bit abstract, okay? So therefore, step number one, we just want to assume that we have here this public role, and we want to simulate this with this public role, because the public role, if we go into a new window, this doesn't have access to the underlying data. So if I select here in the context, public, I see there's no access yet, okay? So if I rename this, let me rename this maybe to public, so we know that we are working here with the public role. And now let's assume we want to share this to this public role. So we want to share this view to the public role, but we don't want to reveal this underlying data, so the structure, the columns, and so on. And then we will see that this would be actually revealed anyways. So there would be some ways of how this could be revealed. So let's share this view. We can do this by granting usage on the database and the schema to this role, and also select, and then also the select on the view. So let me quickly do this. So we will grant select on all of this. And now if we use this command, I can actually just copy it, but I use it here in the role public. Then I will see that in this case, we see that this is a non-secure view. So here we can see that this is false. And also what we will see is that we have here this statement, so this definition statement. And in this case, I can also refresh here. So I can see the data is available. So if I go to public, I see the view in here as well. And also from within here, I can see the definition. So here, even if I don't have access to the underlying table, I can see in this definition, which again, let me go and open it. I can also click here to see the entire definition. This would actually, unfortunately, reveal some data that should not be revealed. So here, for example, we can see that there is a column called job, which is not shared in the actual data that should be shared. So this is not part of the view, but it is the part of the underlying structure of the table. And also additionally that there is maybe somebody or some value that is data scientist. Now maybe this doesn't seem very sensitive information, but of course there could be other situations where this is very sensitive data. So the definition of the view is one way. So just for example, by running the show views like command, we can see this definition. And this is of course a definition that is, or yeah, some underlying information that we might not want to share. So this definition is one of the ways of how underlying data could be shared. And there are other ways of how the underlying data is used for internal optimization. And there are some additional ways of how you can get information about the underlying data and the structure. So therefore, a view, a standard view, is not recommended to be shared if we want to share it in a share. So therefore, it is recommended to use a secure view. And therefore, we will see now how a secure view is different from a standard view. So if we go back here into our main window, then we will see here again using the account admin, we can also create a so-called secure view. And this secure view is just not sharing these underlying information. So we won't be able to reveal the definition of the view, and also this internal optimization that is using some of the underlying data is not done. So in this case, we are saying we are okay with this not being so fully optimized, but we want to be sure that nothing is revealed. So in this case, if I create this, I can just do it using the keyword secure view, and then the rest will be the same. So just as, and then we can use a select, for example, and then again, let me grant select on this to the role public. And now if I again use that same command, show views like. So this secure view is also a normal view in a way, so it is also visible if I refresh in here. I can see it is also here as a view, but just with this a little bit different icon. So we can see this is a secure view. And also what we notice, of course, here the definition is not visible. So this is not revealed because this could give information about the underlying structure or even the underlying data that is not part of the view itself. Additionally, we also see here this flag true, that this is actually a secure view. And this is now how we should actually include it in a share if we want to share data from multiple databases, or also if we don't want to reveal all of the data. And of course, now in the next lecture, we want to learn how we can also share a secure view as we secure view. And afterwards, we also want to see how we can also use such a secure view to share data from multiple databases in one share. Because per default, we know that in a given share, we can always only include one database. So this is what we want to see afterwards. But first of all, we want to see how we can share a secure view, and also what are some limitations if we would want to share a standard view. So first of all, we want to create our share object. We know this is the shell of, this is the share object, just basically the shell. And now, if we want to do this, if we want to create now this share and include the data, in our case, it will be the customer view, we need to also grant usage on the database and also the schema. So this is what we are doing here. Grant usage on the database and the schema. And now we want to grant a select on the view. So in this case, we have heard that it is recommended to use a secure view if we want to share data through a view, for the reasons we've already mentioned in the last lecture. And even there are some limitations or some preventive mechanisms that we are not so easily able to share data in a standard view. So note that if I want to do this, I grant the select on this standard view, this is just our customer view, then I will see that here we get this error message. So here this says non-secure objects can only be granted to shares with secure object only property set to false. So this is a property of our share that per default is set to true. So per default, we can only include the secure objects. Again, we have mentioned that there are some internal optimizations. So this is why the performance of the standard views can be a little bit better sometimes than the standard view, than the secure view. So therefore, in some cases, for performance reasons or for whatever reasons, we might be okay to use a standard view in our share. But then we still, because usually per default this is just not recommended, we need to set this property of the share to false, so that we are not only able to share the secure objects. So how we can do this? Of course, this is a property of our view. So we can run the command alter view, alter share. And then, of course, we change the properties by setting the property to a different value. And here we need to set it to false. And then if we would execute this, of course, we have to also specify the name of the share. So I insert it in here. And then if we do this, we will see that now it is possible to use that in the view. So we see like this, it would be possible. But now also, if we, of course, and I can actually just create and replace it if I want, but yeah, you will see that if we do this, maybe let's do this, then you will see that even per default, so this is a new view, and in this one we cannot, and this is a new share. So in this case, we can of course not grant this select on this standard view, but for this secure view, we can easily do this even without modifying this property. Okay, and now of course, we need to also include the account. So we need to add it to our share object. So we again alter the share, and then afterwards we add our account. Again, you find the account. Here, if you navigate to private sharing, you should see under reader accounts, the locator of this reader account, if you want to follow along. And in this case, I will also add it to the share object. And then if I navigate to this account, I should be able now to see this object. So let's try this. I see show shares, and in here I should be able to see this one. So in here I can see no database is included in this case because we haven't created a database from it yet. So we will do this in a second. And then we will first of all maybe describe this share. So this one was the view share. And then we see that this exists. And we can now create the database from this. So we can see this is what is included. And if I now create a database from this share, I will use the database maybe, and by the way, it doesn't really matter what the database name is, so we can also choose a different name because this is in our other account. So for example, if I say this is the database, let's say just ViewDB, maybe something like this, we can also do this. I just have to use here the share name because there's only one database in this share, so I can easily do this. So I just create the database from this share, and then it will be able to appear in here. We can see this is a shared database, and here also under the views we find our view, and we can see in here also that this is of the type secure view. And of course we could also now query from this view. So if I use the command customer view secure, so in this case I will see, actually let me use this name. So I have to use the correct name of the database. Schema is public, and then the view itself is called customer view secure. We are able to query this data. Okay, so this is how we can share a secure view with, for example, in our case, a reader account. And now we also want to see how we can share data from multiple databases. This is also something that we can do using a secure view. And how we do this? View that is referencing data from multiple databases. To have a look at how we can share a secure view that is referencing data from multiple databases. So for example, we could have a secure view. This could be, I would just use create or replace. So this could be, for example, something from our original customer DB table. And then maybe also we have another database. So here we have our first DB. And in here maybe we have under the public schema another maybe similar table that is also called customers. And in here, if we have a look at the definition and the columns, we can see that here there are maybe similar columns, but maybe we want to use the job from this table because this is actually the correct data. So therefore, what we do is we just join the data using an inner join, and we use the ID column because they are the correct common column so that we can match the rows of those two tables. And we can include the ID and the first name of the first table. So this is just the customers table from the customer DB. And then we have T2. This is just an alias here from this other database. So here we have our first DB, and from this table we use the job column. So essentially, this is just an example, and we just want to use one column from one table, and then we want to use another table from another database. So essentially, we want to use two databases, so data from two databases in a given view. So of course, we make this also a secure view, and we just call it secure view M. So this M just stands for multiple databases. So if I create this secure view like this, and note, I'm not specifying the name of the database, so not the fully qualified table or view name, but here I have just selected customer DB as the context. So then this will be created in this customer DB database. And now if I query from it, I can see that this is how the data looks like. So in this case, we have the ID, the first name, and the job. And now we want to create the share object. So we will just create our replace, and then we will have this view share. And now, of course, everything in the beginning is pretty much the same. So we grant usage on the database where this secure view is created in, and afterwards also the same for the schema. This is also nothing new. But if we now would try to grant also a select on this secure view, so I will try to do this, I will see this would not work, because here we get this error message, a view or function being shared cannot reference objects from another database. So this is not possible. So therefore, to prevent this, we need to grant reference usage on this other database to our share. So reference usage needs to be granted on the additional databases where data is referenced from in our view. So in our view, we have also referenced our first DB. This is part of the definition of the view. So therefore, we need to grant reference usage on exactly this database. So let's quickly do this and then see if we are then able to grant the select on this view. So we have seen this has been granted, this has worked, and now we do the same thing, grant a select on this secure view to see if this now works. And now we see this has worked. Of course, we shouldn't forget to also add our account to this share. And then once we have done this, we should be able to see this share and create a database from it. And then we will test it in our other account. So again, we will go to our reader's account. And in here, let me execute this command to describe this share. So here we have view share. And here we see that this secure view is now included. And this is of the kind view. So we could now create a database from this share again. So we can call it viewDB, but this already exists. So let's call it viewDB, maybe again with an M. Let's try to create it again. And then we can see if this now, if we refresh, is visible in here. So we can see this is there. Under public, we can see that there is now this view, and we can also place the name in the editor, and we can say something like select star from to really make sure that we actually see now the underlying data. And indeed, in this case, we can see that this works. And now we have successfully referenced data from multiple databases. So this is how we can do it using a secure